We're finally at the communicating with your child portion of this video. And basically, I'm going to share some ideas about communicating with your child in order to facilitate better integration of parts of themselves they don't like, past and present, etc., etc. So first things first, I think we would want to validate that it's very normal if you have made an error or if you have done something that you think you shouldn't have done. It's very normal to have things about your past or your behavior that you don't like. Maybe situations that you were in where you didn't really know how to react, or you felt in hindsight that you should have done things differently, or maybe you felt kind of stupid for not knowing how to say something or answer a question, etc. And of course, these are very vulnerable moments, and everybody in their adolescent years might feel sometimes like they're boring or they're a target for others or whatever. And I think those are normal experiences to have, and the feelings that that can evoke are also normal. Really hard to deal with, much easier said than done. But having some shame, that's normal. Having regrets, self-loathing, embarrassment, feeling angry, wanting to distance yourself from a situation, all of that is normal. Those are strategies that we use to try and feel okay, right? Even trying to pretend like something didn't happen, like lying can be a normal thing evoked by one of these difficult situations that you are feeling embarrassed about. I want to reframe this specifically. Like, if there's legitimately something that I did that I wish I had done differently, I'd like to talk about kind of a growth mindset, another pop psychology term, but I think it's useful in this case. Growth mindset basically means that there are kind of two ways to think about ourselves, either as people who do not have the capacity to do something, or as people who are working on it, work in progress. This is something I could do, I just need to modify this, I need to modify that, I need to try this or try that. And I think a growth mindset is really helpful because nobody ever can be completely free of experiences that make you feel like, oh God, I wish I hadn't done that, and those are small things, but it could also be huge things. So nobody lives free of those kinds of experiences or those kinds of feelings. I think people have to be willing to be a beginner. So, if your child is dealing with, I'm trying to think of a very particular situation. Maybe something happened with a friend group and they didn't know how to deal with it properly. And it was the first time they were in that particular kind of social situation. You might say something like, gosh, I think the way you responded makes sense given that you've never been in that position before. Nobody is born knowing how to deal with that particular situation. I say this a lot in therapy. Nobody is born knowing how to X or Y or whatever. I remember once talking with a client, it's very, very sweet, who was interested in learning a language, and she was watching a bunch of YouTube videos about language learning. And somebody said, when you're learning a language, you have to be willing to embarrass yourself, because when you're trying to speak in a language that is not your native tongue, you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna sound stupid, you're gonna mispronounce things, you're going to just say totally poor grammar. I mean, it's inevitable. So in order to learn a language, anybody who's proficient in another language has gone through that. And that's really helpful to remember. I remember talking with a client about skateboarding. This client was really, really into skateboarding. But when I say really into skateboarding, I mean watching people on YouTube skateboarding, right? And she got a couple skateboards, I had a skateboard, and like when it came to like really practicing the tricks, she got so discouraged because every time she watches YouTube, it's like people who have already mastered the tricks and then set up their tripod and they're like showing you how amazing they are at the tricks. And what a lot of young people don't get to see, because maybe they're not in a skateboarding class, right, where they watch other kids fall and fumble and mess up and scrape their knee or whatever, they think that if I'm gonna kind of embark on a new venture of learning something, that my goal is to become master. And they don't see all of the work that has to happen before that. This is true in so many avenues. And I think that's why It's cool sometimes on Instagram or whatever, you see fail videos, like, someone who's trying to bake a cake or something, and the first 10 times it like sunk in on itself or exploded in the oven or it tasted like crap, whatever. But I think that understanding that repeated failures is actually a necessary part of the process of mastery. And that's a huge lesson that a lot of kids have to learn. There's a lot of ways you can help a kid learn that, including encouraging them to do stuff and letting them fail at it, and then letting them figure out what they need to try differently next time. There's a lot here that's really interesting we could talk about. Okay, so we're talking about when legitimate errors are made. This is kind of ways to reframe it. But what about when there's no error that was made? And a young person is actually just using that self-critical voice that we talked about earlier. And sometimes the kid is actually perfect just the way they are, but they're being very cruel to themselves. So this might be, for example, if there's a kind of sexual repression. I mean, sometimes I work with kids who their families were very, very religious, and maybe they taught them that certain types of sexual feelings or, bad or can be dangerous. And it probably wasn't taught to them in that way. Some cases it might, and some really kind of, extreme versions of like religious teachings, but maybe sometimes even in the context of a very kind of mundane lesson about, the risk of having sex, you can get pregnant, that could be interpreted as like this horrible, horrible thing. So if there's any kind of repression or turning against oneself, this is obviously true for kids who maybe feeling really ambivalent about their sexuality. They're developing a sexual orientation, and that could be whether they are gay or straight or bi. I mean, I think it could be a lot of different situations, but if there's internalized homophobia, this could be really important. Just kind of self-acceptance, self-compassion. Nothing is wrong with you. Internalized sexism, sometimes it takes a long time to figure out that, hey, I didn't want to be associated with girls because sometimes I see girls treated badly. And you could ask a kid, hey, could it be this? And they may not understand for like 5 years. I mean, I've seen this happen in my work. Even when it's explicitly presented as a possibility, the light bulb may not go off until years later when you've like put things together. So, just the goal is you model what it would look like to be self-compassionate. And then you just kind of have to wait. You can't force somebody to be self-compassionate, but you can model it and you can present that as a possibility and see, again, if some of the seeds land somewhere. This could even be true for boys, internalized misandry or feeling very overpowered by their sexual urges or feelings. True for girls too, right? But if there's any shame about one's sexuality, this could be very much mixed in with, I want to get rid of that person and become a new person. And we touched on people who may be overly perfectionistic, very self-critical, maybe OCD, maybe like eating disorder, perfectionism. All of that can come with a very critical internal voice. And if you want to talk with your child directly about the name change, if you can do it in a way that feels genuine to you and is not too imbued with big emotions, so you wouldn't want to do this in a fight. You'd want to wait till there's some receptivity. You might ask, so do you think that if you changed your name, you would be able to stop ever feeling vulnerable or like you made a mistake or whatever you think your kid may be struggling with? Do you think that changing your name would actually help you get away from those feelings? Like, what if you change your name, but then you have another difficult emotional experience? Do you change your name again? It's interesting because some parents tell me, oh, my kid has changed their name like 4 times in the last couple of months. So there's definitely something going on there. And it may not be that the kid is trying to escape a difficult emotion 4 times. It could also just be like the fun of changing your screensaver or something, but it is interesting because that happens. So you might ask about making mistakes, or do you think if you changed this thing about your identity, you wouldn't make mistakes again, or you'd be a kind of totally different person from here on out? So you can ask those direct questions if you want to. Lastly, I would say you may be able to in a non-confrontational way, try to instill that gratitude from the Pop Psychology Atlantic article about the past. So it may be, reflecting on moments when you genuinely know your child was really happy, like when you got your puppy, for example, or something that's really meaningful to the child, and not necessarily to rub their nose in the gender thing, but maybe, you put on I say put on a home movie. That really dates me. You pull up on your phone the video of like when you went to the breeder or to wherever and you got the puppy, and like, do you remember how happy we were that day? It was so amazing. In a gentle way that you think might be helpful to just remind the young person that they did in fact have happy moments, and it's not all doom and gloom from the past. But the big picture that I want to kind of share here, or the big point, is that the best way to help your child with all of this about integration and past self and new self is to help your child to be happier now. So to be more productive now, to be more, maybe productive is the wrong word, but to enjoy life more now, to be able to have a laugh now, to do things that are fun and meaningful now. Not just like getting good grades on a test, not just, succeeding academically, but remember, the way we think about our past is largely determined by how we're feeling right now. So being able to create more positive memories helps a young person to be kind of present where they are now. So I would say that is probably the biggest bang for your buck, in addition to some kind of gentle communication strategies.